So what I would like to talk to you about today is the question of research safety, but also I will touch upon ethics, even though that's not my main topic today. And I would like to just start by sharing a PowerPoint with you. Please give me just thumb up so I know that you can see it. Yes, good. So I think the background to this talk that I've been also doing and given to other audiences before, and also in different PhD programs and so on, and also the focus of our book is very much in the line of the securitization of research that is going on today globally, which force us, and I will get back to you soon what I mean with that force us to think much more systematically about the field work that we are carrying out in authoritarian settings, yes, but also with marginalized communities, both in the global south and the global north. And I hope in this session today, very short session, that I will give you some help or assistance on how you can reflect on your own fieldwork and how you can think about different kinds of comprehensive risk assessment. And I will speak about both how you can do a context analysis and also how to think about vulnerabilities and capacities that you or other parts of the projects is bringing, but also how to think through a security plan for once you're going to do field work. And I think just to start a bit with to reflect on securitization of research, and I think for most of us who are working in the Middle East, and at least for me, the murder of Giulio Regeni outside Cairo in 2016 was definitely a wake-up call. I was at that time having a PhD student. I was a supervisor of a PhD student who was actually carrying out fieldwork himself in around the Arab uprisings with youth, the youth movements in Cairo. And what was quite exceptional with Regini's case, I think, is that this was a PhD student who knew the setting very well. He knew the language. He had been there before. He was very well networked. He was affiliated with local institutions and people in Cairo, and he also had very well-respected and experienced supervisors. And also, his topic was not that sensitive, so to say. You know, so I think when he was murdered by the Egyptian police, which there was an investigation afterwards. I think it really sent some kind of like shockwave through the research community, both supervisors and researchers in the global north, but also the fact that we are constantly collaborating with people with institutions in setting, working with vulnerable marginalized communities. And we started to like really think about do we need to rethink how we are carrying out the field work that we are carrying out, and to think differently about it, basically. At the same time, I have also been working for a very long time in Rwanda, and also there during certain periods when the constitution would change for a few years, there was lots of discussions going on and the increased political repression in Rwanda and so on. So I had this with me, and suddenly it was really an urge to start to reflect on this more systematically. And I share this with a lot of my colleagues, and I think that's one reason for why we actually ended up deciding to write this book, and I joined the project of Ellen and others. At the same time, also, I mean, just looking by figures on academic freedom, like VDEM has its Scholars at Risk, Freedom House, we know that what is called transnational repression is becoming much more like of a normalized phenomenon. I mean, that it's not only in the states where you're carrying out your research that you might be targeted as a researcher, or but also when you're leaving the country, for instance, if you are coming from specific societies, you do research there, but you leave to continue your career, maybe in other settings, you are still sort of followed by security services. And they are also naming specifically 5 countries Saudi, Turkey, Rwanda, Russia, and China, where this is becoming a very normalized phenomenon. And we also know that not only the reported attacks in the different that are increasing, but also it's also a large number in different countries today that is targeted. And this figures just between 2017 to 2022 it's rapidly changing, actually. So I think this is sort of the background where we need to not only be concerned by ethics, but also to put some more attention to what we call research safety in this book. And another thing that I think is important just to mention here is also that, yes, we know that there at the same time also it's more of an institutionalized securitization in academia. I mean, I saw that you sent out an email with the interview with a link to the review board and how you're going to put in this ethics application. But so it's increasingly controlled. I mean, the different procedures for fieldwork, but it's very often concentrated on ethics and not so much on safety. So it's concentrated on very much principle, like the 3 principles of like informed consent, do no harm, and anonymity. But it's very little like actually concern those review board with how to think systematically about safety, not only for you as a researcher, but also for the whole project, for the research assistants, for the PhDs working in the project, but also for like what sometimes is called fixers, people who are like local people who are helping out as working as drivers or other things, translators, interpreters in the different research projects today. So and that there is actually a risk with also leaving too much of that to institutions, because they are not always up to date with the field. I mean, I'm sure quite a few of you here in this room understand that, you know. It might be senior people who have not been working. So it's not only like that it might be like more senior people who are working, and they might not have been actually into the field for quite a long time, but they have more been working with local research assistants and so on, you know. And so, I mean, and some of those boards are maybe not the most well-equipped board to take the decisions. So, I mean, potentially there is also a problem here when it comes to knowledge production, you know, that if we sort of like leave and hand over those procedures and those questions to those different boards, it's really important that we also actually make it our own obligation. It's like really that we take it serious, that we think through like different ways of minimizing risks, both for ourselves as researchers, as students, doctorate candidates, but also as supervisors, of course. So even if that's my final introduction point here, even if you get this approval from the ethics review board, you still there are other things you need to be concerned with. And I will speak about some of those now today. I forgot to say that in the beginning, but due to the fact that we are recording, I will just talk first, and then please gather your questions and we will take the questions, or if you have comments and reflections, and we will have time for that in the end. So when then is it important to think about different risks considering a fieldwork? I think it's important to just tease out that the risk can be found in very different areas and in different dimensions of the research projects we are carrying out. Of course, it can be the research topic. The research topic might be more or less sensitive, considering the different environments that you're going to work with, which has an impact on the safety of you as a researcher and the people you're collaborating with. There might also be like important to consider risk in relationship to the external environment then, and different actors that are that you have in that specific community or setting that you're going to work with. And of course, as I mentioned, the kind of populations and community that you're going to work with. Are you going to do elite interviews, for instance, with one kind of community, or are you going to work with, like someone here was saying, undocumented migrants, maybe, you know? It's very different communities where you need to consider risk in different ways. Methods, I mean, for a long time, I think there was this understanding that maybe the most important things to reflect on when it comes to risk is if you're doing participant observations or in-depth interview, really is going out to the communities, taking part in the society, and that would be something different than if you're going to do service. But today, both the way service are doing today, household service and so on, but also if we think about the fifth point here, the ICT, information and communication technology, it's equally important to think about risk also if you are conducting service, for instance. Because the development when it comes to ICTs and the way that also data from that kind of methods can be gathered, but also used for different purposes for actors that should not get hold of them, so to say. It's increasing today with the ICTs and the development in that area. And then of course we have lots of what we call in the book general risks that has to do with, like, both I mean, traffic, natural disasters, and of course we're all aware nowadays about the pandemics, you know, and the pandemics like the COVID, for instance, also means that we need to have different perspective, or really think about risk in a different perspective, maybe. I mean, with the COVID, for instance, one of the new risks you had to start to think about was the transmission of the disease, you know, that, I mean, even if it would have been possible maybe to continue to do field work, then maybe it was not safe and it was not ethical, because it also might mean then that you're actually participating spreading the virus. So that's just one example. And what we're also arguing in this book very strongly then is that it's also really important to think about this from the perspective from, like, both before you start your field work and during when you are in the field, but also after field work, which sometimes is something that is lost, you know, that there are certain risks and safety concerns that you really need to bring with you all along the research projects, from the very first moment when you start to have the idea until the publication and the dissemination of the results. So let's start then and look at get a bit deeper into those the three different areas, or like themes, where what you need to consider if you're going to do this more like systematic or comprehensive risk assessment. And we start with context analysis, and where you basically the main aim. So I mean, one way to do this is basic. And when I had workshops with the PhDs on this, for instance, or research assistants, I mean, we have been working with, like, mind mapping, or like mapping out things like big sheets, you know, or like a board like the one behind Ellen, you know, and that you really try to draw up, you know, this is my project, and how does the context look like with regard to this specific project and this specific research question, research problem that I'm interested in. And in the first part of this context analysis, I mean, the idea is to try to identify different threats, but also at the same time to your research project, you know, and with that, I mean, not only, again, you as a researcher, but all the different persons that are involved in the project, you know, but also more importantly to actually assess how likely it is that they will materialize. Because, I mean, we know that there are, I mean, lots of different threats, you know, might be out there, you know, but it's very different if there is a possibility or not, you know, if they are going to actually materialize. And one way to think about this that we are elaborating on in the book is to think about both direct and indirect threats, where of course the more direct threats towards you and your research project, it's what's maybe it's the most important things to reflect upon. And then we are elaborating with opposing and supporting actors here. So, I mean, questions you can ask yourself then is, who are the potential opposing actors to this project? So if I have a project on different diaspora groups and their way of trying to influence foreign policy, for instance, then it's important to think, I mean, who in this society might be really opposing that this project is going forward, and that I'm going to be able to gather the kind of material through interviews, observations, whatever, and tendency of meetings and so on, you know. So maybe there are like you sort of like map this, what are the different opposing actors, and to really consider, so why are they opposing the project, and what are their incentives, but also more importantly, what are their capabilities. So are there groups or members of group, how many are they, and what kind of funding or possibilities do they have to actually, or knowledge to actually be active in this, you know? Do they have, are they very do you find them on social media a lot, you know, so that you can expect that they will actually use that at the forum, or do they belong to a militant group with other kind of capabilities? So to reflect, or do you just say that, yeah, they might oppose it, but I think there is a very little risk actually that they will involve. I mean, they might not like it, but I don't think I have to be concerned with them opposing the project, because they are still not that influential in the society, or don't have the possibility to act upon this. And then, of course, also to think about the potential supporters, you know, that you will have in the field. And here it can be really important to reflect on, like, because this is the persons or the institutions that you might want to actually affiliate yourself with or get in contact with before you start the field work, or when you're in the field. But also to think then, I mean, how, if something really happens to me, how likely is it that they actually will step in and support me, you know? So to think through opposing and supporting actors, and then of course to think through more contextual threats. And here one important thing is, of course, how the infrastructure around communication looks like, you know. Do I know that I have an internet connection all the time? Which areas do I not have internet connections? How will I do when I am conducting field work in those areas, and so on? And then a couple of other questions that I already touched a bit upon, you know, like natural disasters and diseases and so on. So now you sort of have mapped out the context, and then you sort of move into not only yourself, as in this little map that I found on a web page, where, I mean, there are lots of this out on the web if you want to think about. I mean, it's also very much related to the whole issue of positionality, right? Or reflexivity, to actually get to know yourself in relationship to the project and the research you're carrying out, to sort of like keep track of yourself, you know, depending on what the project is on, you know, how can I use myself, but how can I also be a hindrance myself, because I'm like too attached to this, or I belong to a certain group or community, or I come from a specific background, and so on. So it's also a really, I have actually trainings only on positionality, sometimes with PhDs and master students, when we really work on like trying to reflect on ourselves in relationship to their specific projects. But here, is it a bit different, the way we discuss it in the book? Because here it's really to think about different elements, we call it, you know, identities of the researcher and project that might be related to a threat profile. So there are like different professional and personal identity that can be seen as problematic in a specific social and political context. I mean, of course, I mean, we have gender issues here. We have issues of sexuality. We know that in certain society, it's really hard to, or like it might be a threat if you're gay and you're working in certain communities, you know, and also, I mean, if you are affiliated with specific ethnical backgrounds, you know, you might, or religious backgrounds, it might be a threat to you when you're entering into the field, not per se necessarily, but if something happens, that's maybe also when it might be, you know, become a problem, you know, or that it might be that this might be reason to actually, or an argument for actually getting rid of you, or make sure that you can't conduct your field work, and that might be an entrance to actually get you out of the field, you know. If there are actors who are opposing what you're doing, you know, they might use that specific part of who you are to make it harder for you to work. On the other hand, it's also important that, I mean, there are also things that it's very helpful. I think, I don't know how many of you who are mothers, you know, or fathers, you know, but that kind of things, like that you have a child, you know, it's also something that can be really helpful lots of times, you know. It's something that people can bond with. Lots of people share that experience, you know, and it's also something that can be useful. So to try to, and that can be used instead then as some kind of like capability that can like help you to connect and navigate the field in a more smooth way, maybe. And then to think through, I mean, it's really hard sometimes, those things, because obviously certain things we can't hide. We maybe don't want to hide them, you know, but also some things we can't hide, you know. But there are, of course, things you could do and that you might want to do that has to do, for instance, with your social presence. I mean, both in the field, and I'm sure you have experienced this if you have been working as research assistants, there are different ways of entering into a field, connect with people, you know. I mean, for me, lots of times, you know, it has, I mean, I'm really thinking a lot about dress codes, for instance, when I'm working in different settings in the Middle East, but also in Rwanda, you know, I'm thinking about that a lot. I mean, and there are other things also, you know, that you might to think about it, but also actually online. So I'm a lucky person because I never started with Facebook, because I was very skeptical and everybody thought I was really boring when it came, you know. But today it's actually quite good that I'm not on Facebook, because it's no possibility for people so for instance, I worked a lot in Israel, you know. It's very little to be found about me if the Israeli security forces like security services interest in me, or if I'm going out to Rwanda, for instance. It's so very little to find about me online, so to say, you know. It's the professional pages pretty much, and that's it. So, but to think through that, I mean, the different platforms that you're out, and you might want to curate it a bit. Of course, it depends on how comfortable you feel with that, to actually be curating your image to go into the field work. But it's also something you need to at least reflect upon, because it's very easy today to find things about each other. And then, of course, it's the whole issue also about the topic of your research projects, you know. And there, I think it's important also to actually think about how you present the research project. So I don't know if you have decided to have some kind of joint presentation of like what you're doing. And of course, we have to be ethically sound in the sense that we have to be very clear what we are going to do our research on, because that's something we need to be as researchers. But it's still, you can really present and describe your project in different ways, right? So that's one way also to navigate this. And then again, to really also think through if the methods you're applying, I mean, what are the vulnerabilities specifically connected to the method and to the that you are applying or not, you know, or are there actually something that maybe you even want to reflect on the methods you have chosen. It's not always the case that you can do that if you're in a big project, but if you're working as a PhD student and so on, you might actually want to change. I mean, you might find that, no, this is too risky for me to do this and to use this kind of method. So I'd rather go about doing it this way, you know, and to really elaborate on those things constantly throughout your project. And this might be something that you don't discover until you are in the field. You are in the field and you start to do interviews and you realize, now this is not, or you start to do service and you realize that it doesn't really work out. I have this person following me the whole time, you know, I don't feel comfortable with this, so I need to find a different way to do it, and to be reflexive all the time, and to think about that. And of course, to also, as I write here also, you know, to of course, it helps if you speak the local language lots of times. On the other hand, you might speak it with a specific dialect, or if it's Arabic, we know Arabic is spoken very differently in different parts of the Middle East, right? So, I mean, all of those things can be an asset, but it can also be something that might cause you a problem and greater risk. So it's not black and white, but the important thing here is to constantly really reflect on those issues in relation to the fieldwork and the context where you're working. So let's say that we are still in the beginning. So you haven't started to work yet. You have done this context analysis. You have been mapping out your and the research projects a bit, vulnerabilities, capacities, you know, and now you need to really think through. So if the worst things happen, you might want to have some kind of security plan. And of course, part of the security plan, I mean, in one way has to do with what things that are preventive, you know, actions that you can take already before you enter into the field. So for instance, curating your public image and so on, you know. But there might also be things that happens when you are in the field, you know, and it's always important, I think, to think through those things. I mean, mostly nothing happens. We know that. Very often things are going very smooth, or we need to do some changes, but we continue and it works out fine, you know. But it's still good sometimes to think through those things, because when they happen, you will be more prepared, and then you might much easier sort the situation out. So I think one of the main things here, I think it's important to reflect on, is to have some kind of point of contact, like a person that you are in contact with. Especially if you're working, if you did this context analysis and you started to think and you see that there is certain risks associated with the kind of field work that you are going to carry out, it's good to have some kind of person that you might want to just check in with every day on WhatsApp or Signal or whatever you're using. And that person also will be the person you contact if there is any kind of emergency. So you can say that, let's say 10 o'clock every evening, and we just check in. It doesn't mean that you have to have a long conversation with a person. It might be just one message. You know, I did that myself with a few of my PhDs, and I think it works very, very well. You know, it's just, it doesn't have to be that you have to be in contact so much with a person. It's more like that there is someone there following, you know, and this is good to decide before. And it might also be good that it's not a person who's like super busy all the time, but someone who you actually know will be able to follow up, you know, on what you discuss. And then you need to have some kind of understanding of different emergency contacts that you might have to access. So it's always good to have a list of, you know, hospitals and embassies. Maybe they can't always help us, but sometimes they can, and other like local affiliations, local institutions, and so on, you know, to really have that, and maybe not only in one place, maybe not only on your computer in case you lose your computer or your phone, but actually to have it in a few places, you know. And then to think through, and this is, I think it's a lecture in itself, because there's so much that can be said about this, but to really think through how you are dealing with stress as a person. What's happening to you when you're crossing the border and the security service starts to scrutinize you, you know? How do you react? What's happening to you? To think through that. What's happening if someone starts to follow you in the streets, or if someone is coming up to you and started to ask you who you're working for, why you're there, or, you know, some random, I mean, all this kind of, or what's happening if you're losing your computer, or like somebody's stealing everything, you know, and you are there, you're supposed to do this field work, and suddenly you lose all your stuff. I mean, just to think through those things might be really helpful in advance. Maybe I don't know you now, so maybe you already have been in those situations, but I still think also that even if you have, we can learn from those experiences also. What's happening if you I mean, for me, for instance, I mean, if you end up in situations where you're like, where your PhDs is getting like indirect threats about things and stuff, you know, I mean, what is happening to me then as a supervisor who is supervising? I mean, there are lots of, you know, also situations that I can discuss later if you're interested on where I really think also that I changed my way of like reacting. And I think that was partly due to the fact that I'm trying to go back and think through those different situations, you know, and to in that way preparing for the next time, you know. So that's the security plan. So, I mean, as I said, most of those things you need to do before, but you also need to follow up when all those things, when you have come to the different community you're going to work with, or like the different part of Kenya where you're going to do the survey, or I don't know where you're going, you know, or like in Saudi and Yemen, Tunisia and Kuwait and all those places you're going to, you know, when you're settling in there, if it's not, if it's a new place for you or a new setting, and also if it's not so new, it might still be important to think this through, because things change. We tend to think, and I think for me that has been a real problem also when I was bringing this up when I was deputy head a few years ago, and I was trying to get supervisors to start to think about this. They were like, no, I know this setting, I know it, I don't need to do it, you know. While younger people are much more like, they are not so maybe used, it's a new place, and they are much more eager to learn. But actually quite a lot of the seniors, they haven't been there for a very long time, or things have been changed in the last, you know, 6 months and so on. So it's important to try to keep open, you know, to the fact that field sites do change, and to sort of map them out, and to bring this risk assessment with you and ask yourself if there are things that needs to be updated or thought differently about. And this is, of course, also very much connected to that once you start to conduct the field work in the field, you are starting to collect the data, which, independent of what kind of the data it is, there might be new things, or that you might need to reconsider certain things, you know, on maybe you need to build networks in a different way, or maybe you didn't plan to work with some field assistant, someone like driving you around or helping you to actually get access to places, but suddenly you realize that you need to, because you don't get access otherwise. And then there is a new person suddenly in the project, you know, or that you're working with, which you need to bring into your risk assessment then, right? So there are lots of things changing once you start to collect the data that needs to be brought into this more comprehensive picture of potential risks. And then after the field, this is actually from a conference last week that I was at ECAS in Köln. And I thought about it there when I was there, actually, in one of the seminar rooms, because what we really need to think about after the field work is, of course, I mean, first of all, we want to stay up to date, right? You want to stay in contact with interlocutors or different contacts that you have, or maybe people who have been even more recently in the field, to know what's going on, and to also be able to, like, know, for instance, if I take this PhD of mine who finished his thesis, and when he was carrying out the thesis, for instance, quite a lot of the people he spoke with, his interlocutors, wanted to have their names in the thesis, because they were extremely proud of what they, as a youth movement, managed to do during the uprisings in Cairo. A few years later, when he was finishing up some of his papers, Sisi was in power, and it looked very different, and actually quite a few of them were in prison, you know. So of course then it was really important for him that he was connected to a few people still, and he could like actually reach out to them and discuss how should I deal with this. I promised them to be with their names in my thesis, but I don't know if this is so wise any longer. And you know, another thing, and that's why I thought about it in the conference, was when you're doing seminar presentations that are not, you know, drafts, you know. Lots of times we tend to be a bit more sloppy then, maybe not so, you know, it's maybe for a smaller crowd, maybe you know the people and you're presenting sometimes. But again, going back to ICTs and how it looks today, I mean, a document like that travels really fast, right? So I think it's really important to think through and to keep this safety perspective with you also when you're presenting drafts, but of course also then when you are publishing and disseminating results from the project. And here I also just wrote that I think after the field, I think it's extremely important if you're working in different institutions, which I don't really know if to what extent you're doing now, but to really make this, normalize this in the institutions, you know. I mean, we share, we have seminars of theories, we have seminars on methods, and we have seminars on ethics maybe, but very rarely we share explicitly the kind of things that I've been talking with you about now today, you know. And I think that's could be shared much more, and not only with the people working exactly the same setting, you know, or with exactly the same community, you know, but more broadly, because we can learn from each other, from all the different experiences that we have from working in certain settings and with certain communities. A few last slides only on this society we are living in today, which is very data driven, right? And it's data driven with the help of ICTs. And I think it's important here to really also, maybe it comes natural for you or some of you, but I know from my own experience and also from experience, and I think sometimes actually Sweden is quite naive when it comes to those things. But to really think systematically and holistically about how you use different ICTs when you're conducting your research. And to be aware of the fact that, I mean, pretty much everything we're doing, if we don't doing it in very specific ways, we do leave traces behind. So it's really important to start to think about this from the very beginning. So it's important to because there is surveillance going on today on a level that we haven't seen before. And if you're working with sensitive topics and communities that are like targeted from like different regimes, for instance, or if there are community violence between groups and so on, you know, it's not that hard any longer to like through data profiling or different ways of merging data that you can find quite a lot of things that you didn't think that it was possible. You can put the different pieces together and get a full picture of what's going on, you know. If you're really interested in that as an opposing actor, so to say. And here, I mean, I think what you really need to think about here is to do something similar, you know. So when you have been doing this context analysis and your vulnerabilities and capacities and the security plan, you know, you might want to really sit down for a moment to think through. So how do my data, what kind of data will I actually collect here now and or produce, and how will I make use of it? But also like, and who is again interested in the data and its sources and so on, you know, and what could they potentially do, but then with a very strong focus on this, their possibilities actually accessing, using some kind of surveillance when it comes to your data, you know, or accessing your data in different ways. And to start to think about that the very moment where you're connecting with people sometimes. For some of you, that will be important, I guess, you know, depending on what you come up with in your sort of like this fuller picture of the risk associated to your specific project. But, you know, I mean, there is quite a big difference with contacting someone on Facebook or with Signal. You know, Signal, you don't know who is sending and you can't read a message. I mean, you can potentially if you really want to get, but it's really at a very high costs, you know. So we list a lot of different strategies for handling digital risks, and one of the strategies is like that there is like we can never be totally like safe. You can never promise anybody when you're sending in your ethical approval that nobody ever will, and because we can't promise that any longer, basically, that nobody will know who you contacted or who you interviewed, right? But for lots of opposing actors, they don't want to spend too much time and dig into it too. So there is also this, you know, this idea of like, I mean, first of all, like that it comes with a cost. And if you do it a bit, you hide it in this, like some ways you use specific programs when you're contacting persons. You may have 2 different computers, or you might even like just the naming of your files on your computer might not be like, you know, different names on the village where you collected the material, right? But instead like summer plans or what do I know, you know. I mean, I think it can be really important. We have lots of, I think actually this chapter is one of the most interesting because I think there are lots of innovative ways of how you can think about this, which might be that doesn't draw the attention immediately to what you're doing, but also that it's a way of like increasing the cost if people really want to get hold of your data, you know. But do think about this. What kind of apps do you use when you're contacting persons? And when you're browsing, how are you going to are you going to use Tor? And then again, that might be forbidden in the country where you are going to work, you know. So then it's like, should I still use it, or should I mean, there are lots of those negotiations and discussions that you need to have with yourself, you know. But make sure to bring the ICTs into your risk assessment. I think that's the main message here. I mean, to bring that with you. Of course, questions also of like, if you're conducting interviews, where do you store the data? How long do you keep the data? Do you send it immediately off to someone and then delete? I mean, there are lots of things you can do this in various ways, you know. Very often I have had persons sending the interviews. I work a lot with interviews to me via Signal, and then the person can erase it and I have them, you know. And I mean, which might help if there will be questions about what he or she is doing in this neighborhood, interviewing Syrian refugees or whatever, you know. So bring that with you into your, and here is from my own fieldwork, my recent one. It's in Tel Aviv and the demonstrations that is going on there. So I end here and I open up for questions and comments.